And that's about the time I stepped down, so I was like, okay, bye. Yes.
Well, welcome y'all to the second evening of Minding Our Minds. We are thrilled to have this series as we are continuing our overall series this year of All In, Heart, Soul, Mind, and Strength, and we're focusing on the mind. And so it seemed like a perfect time for us in congregational life and care to give some really detailed thought and practice into how we care for one of our most valuable assets, which is the thing that lives up here, but also how it impacts the rest of our bodies. And I immediately knew when we started planning this that I wanted to reach out to Lindsay, whom I've had the privilege of knowing for a number of years now. Lindsay Bridges is a physician in Charlotte, a retired physician. Retired doctor or something. Lindsay has a background in medicine and is at the Charlotte Center for Mindfulness. I knew her through a previous church and also heard her speak on this topic at a previous church, and it was my introduction to mindfulness. I didn't really know much about it, and I heard Lindsay speak and immediately thought, I want to know more about this. I want to understand this better. And even that 1 hour talk that she gave really gave me some things to think about that have really impacted my mental wellness and helped me to be more centered and calm. And so just being in Lindsay's presence is calming, but hearing her, I'm gonna I could stand here and say great things about you all day, and I'm not gonna do that because you came here to hear her. So without further ado, Lindsay Bridges.
Put a mic on.
And I'm not used to standing in front of people, and I am working with a little bit of plantar fasciitis. So I'm wondering if I just turn a chair around.
Absolutely.
As long as you're still on camera, Lindsay, I don't think you can.
How's that?
And then I would just clip this right on top, closer here.
How's
It's gonna
that?
go in your pocket.
Is that
Yep, that's
okay? Good. Okay. Well, I have to say why I had my pause about retired physician. I actually walked away from medicine when I was 38. Do you retire at 38 or do you walk away? I think I walked away. And I had to pause about, and she's so calm to be around. My daughter is a member here, and she's who brought me back here, which I'm so grateful for, and she was almost here tonight. And if she had been in the room, she would have raised her hand and said, oh, let me tell you about the other moments. And I just had this vision of Irina in the room and bringing her full honesty. So I did have my little moments. I walked away from medicine when I was 38 to become a mindfulness teacher, and that was not part of the plan. It wasn't even a part of the plan about the month before I walked away. And I'm really grateful for this chance to share around why I did that, why mindfulness was important enough for me to make that transition with y'all. I want to say I get invited. I am one of the people who run Charlotte Center for Mindfulness. I get invited to do these hour talks here and there. And I'm going to do it differently with y'all than I've ever done. And that's because it's here. I grew up here in Charlotte. I grew up at First Presbyterian Church downtown. My dad was the church organist choir director there when I was little, so I was very embedded in the Presbyterian world, including those of you who remember the Peaks here. So I spent a lot of time with the Peaks here as well, and Covenant in a lot of ways is a return home for me. And like I said, I'm very grateful for my daughter who brought me back to be here. So thinking about mindfulness in more of my home roots of Presbyterian, I felt a called to talk instead of the usual mindfulness talk, to instead look at how mindfulness for me was my missing piece in my spiritual journey, and really changed the directory of how I understood myself in relationship with the whole of my life, for sure, but certainly in relationship with my spiritual life. Mindfulness can be understood in so many different ways, and one way it tends to be talked about in our culture is in this level of secular skills building to reduce stress. It's very good at that. There's a reason that it's gotten so much press in that way. There are very learnable skills of mindfulness that you can measure, that people who learn these skills feel better in their lives, feel more, a greater sense of efficacy at how to meet what's really challenging and what's really hard, a greater sense of well-being in the midst of, the joys, which we always want, but no life is just the joys, a greater sense of well-being in the midst of the hard, the challenging. So I could sit here and give you that sort of secular mindfulness conversation, but for me, in my own journey, understanding it at that level really, it really strips mindfulness of a much richer, much deeper, endlessly compassionate, radical liberation. Like there is like this whole other wellspring into my life that mindfulness invited me in. And it was something I didn't have, a particular set of skills I really didn't have. So for me, the missing link that mindfulness was, and we use the word mindfulness, but it's really mind-heartfulness. When we talk about mindfulness, we're always talking about the wisdom of the mind and the strength and the courage of the heart. That's what bringing both sides of that together is when we're in this quality of mind-heart that we just do better. So when I'm saying mindfulness, I really mean mind-heartfulness in everything I say. For me, it was this link between, I had my spiritual values. I had that idea of who I wanted to be and how I wanted to be. It was very clear. And I also was dealing with the reality of me and a sort of messy me that couldn't quite figure out why I couldn't quite get it together in the way I wanted. And that mismatch was very frustrating, but I was just keeping on at it and keeping on going until something in my life came up that just wasn't working anymore. And that was what took me into this deep dive. So from that perspective, I'm just going to share this as kind of, my spiritual journey with my Presbyterian roots, my faith tradition, my spiritual life, and this thing we call mindfulness. So growing up in the church, and particularly with my parents, my spiritual life was at the core for me, very, very much. I had a sense of mission, like I really wanted to live a life of service. And that sense of mission gave me satisfactoriness, a fullness, a sense of direction, a sense of meaning that I cared a lot about. And very very early high school, I got really clear that the direction I was going to take with that was medicine. I would become a doctor, and that would be service work that I had to offer in the world. And I just kind of have to laugh. Even in college, I was a religion major, and my religion major and my spiritual readings, I mean, that's where the heart, that's what brought me alive in college. The science, it's just like, had to grind my way through them so I could pass the MCAT, so I could get to medical school. But there was like no spark of life in that at all at that time. For me, and I never questioned, so am I on the right path here? Didn't wonder whatsoever. Medicine was a very practical thing that I could get my hands on and see how I thought this would be healing work I would have to offer in the world. Knowing what I knew about medical school, about medical training, I was worried about what that environment would literally do to my soul. I had heard enough stories about medical training as a sort of soul-killing world, and I felt like I had to buffer myself, protect myself as much as possible, build up enough experiences that would carry me through the training I had in front of me. So I really sought out any kind of spiritually oriented service work I could find, and went and did it. So in college, I spent a summer working with Mother Teresa's sisters in what was then called Calcutta. I also then went back after college, spent about 5 or 6 months working with her sisters in Nepal. I then spent, 5 or 6 months working with homeless teenagers in Dublin, also with Catholic sisters. You can notice a little trend here. Ooh, those sisters were good. I mean, like, if you want spiritual inspiration in service work, Catholic sisters, they have it going. They were a good group to hang out with in so many ways, and a really core part of my life in that time. Just a little side note, one time Mother Teresa was in Calcutta when I was there for about 2 weeks. And there was one day, she took my hair. I had a ponytail, and she took my ponytail and she said, "I will cut this off myself when you become a sister." I was like, "Oh no, I don't know how to tell you, but no, you're not getting my hair." Love being with y'all, but this is not gonna happen. And so I took all of that into medical school. And what I feared that environment would be like was absolutely there. There were so many ways that system and that way of thinking about healthcare was toxic. I mean, it just was in so many ways. I remember 3rd year of medical school, walking down the hall at Chapel Hill. I went to Chapel Hill for med school, and I was walking down the hospital hall, and I had the thought, healing. You will not take that word away from me. I mean, like, if I had actually used that word in certain rounds I had gone on, that would have been seen like saying, blasphemous. Ridiculed for, we're not here for that kind of stuff. So that side was there. What I wasn't as prepared for is how much beauty there was as well. Some of the doctors, some of the nurses, some of the staff, whoever they were, and certainly a lot of the patients were profoundly beautiful teachers around what healing meant in the midst of sometimes just really awful conditions. And I so appreciated the modeling of care I saw over and over. I just brought to mind earlier today, there was a chief resident when I was a medical student. There was a chief resident in the surgery department. She was one of 2 women in the department. So just that in of itself, she had to be like a powerful spirit to hold her place there. But she was bound and determined that how she cared for people mattered the most to her about how she showed up moment by moment by moment on rounds. So she would be on rounds with a group of male surgeon doctors who, you know, you didn't do any of that soft stuff, and she would stop in the middle of rounds and take a patient's hand and look them in the eye and go out in the hall and get ridiculed for it and absolutely not stop. So there, I came away also with a tremendous amount of respect for ways us humans can show up in all sorts of situations, in all sorts of environments. After med school, I went to University of New Mexico for my residency, and then came back to North Carolina, ended up in Western North Carolina, up in the mountains, and I worked at a federally funded rural healthcare clinic that was doing tremendous work. It was a clinic that was started for migrant farm workers, and it had expanded greatly to really servicing a high-need mountain community area, and doing it in really beautiful ways. It was considered one of the models for rural healthcare for the nation, because it was having such an impact on the community health needs. So on one level, I found myself at what I had gone into medicine to do. You know, like I was at the clinic I set out to be at. They were doing the best of the work that I could see that family practice had to offer. And by the end of my first year there, I knew without question that I hated my job and that I desperately wanted out, desperately wanted out. I loved my patients. I loved my coworkers. It was the system that just didn't work for my being. I felt like often my patients would come into the room, the stress that they would bring into the room, and what my training had taught me to do and what the system wanted me to do often just didn't line up. Like there was a hole in the middle of the room. I could, in the context of that clinic, give, you know, the best diabetic care that we could. We had it going in that clinic. We had access to all sorts of things. But what I couldn't do was help my patient not get that care, then get in their car and drive straight to McDonald's. Because their stress was so overwhelming, their life, that no matter what the care we were giving, McDonald's was the attempt at stuffing the stress away. The attempt at, and that I didn't know what to do with. I felt like it was like hitting my head up against a cinder block wall all day long and really burning out over it. It was downright fear-inducing for me to find myself in the place I had put so many years of work to get to without any plan B. I mean, there was like literally no plan B here. And feel like I was a failure at it because I knew I couldn't continue to make this work. And it just brought up so many questions for me, like, so what should I do instead? I tried one class in public health, thinking, well, maybe that's how I shift it. And that took me even further away from the patient contact. And I knew, like, oh, no, 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 no. It's not actually that I wanted away from my patients. It was that I wanted a more effective relationship with my patients. What I didn't understand at that time was what was missing. What was missing is I didn't actually have a very effective relationship with myself. I didn't actually know how to meet my own stress a whole lot better. The conditions in my life were such that I was maintaining in my skill set. But you pushed me, and I didn't know this at that time, it pushed me too far, then, I might be driving to McDonald's 3 times a day too. Who knows? My skill set could only get me so far, and it was falling apart with that. So I would meet these people that I felt like, but that's it, like they have it together. How is it that they can find their way into not just like having this spiritual aspiration, but having this sense of you could feel it when you were with them. There was a woman I took care of, I listened to that phrase, I took care of, in New Mexico. She was 62 years old. At that point, I thought she was old. She and her husband were there. She was end-stage renal disease, needed to go on dialysis or die, was really basically where she was. She lived 30 miles out a dirt road in rural New Mexico, no running water, no electricity. She had been, don't know if I'm remembering my numbers exact, but this is the ballpark, pregnant 19 times, delivered 17 live births, and out of the 17 live births had 4 sets of twins, raised 10 of her grandchildren, adopted 5 of her grandchildren, and adopted 5 of her foster children. And I said to her kind of jokingly, you must love kids. And she just like broke into this just radiant, beautiful smile and said, I love children. And she and her husband, their room, it was like this little haven in the hospital. I spent as much time in their room as I could while they were there, because I could sit and just like, And she was dying. It was either go on dialysis or die. And she wouldn't have anything to do with the dialysis. She was not going to touch that. And so the service kept her on, trying to change her mind. She was just ready to go home. But there was no problem with it. She and her husband were just both fine. Finally, the attending took rounds in there one morning, and he tried to say, he couldn't say to her, you're gonna die. What he said was, you got to do this dialysis. You got to do it. If you don't do it, it's not going to work. I think he said something like that. He couldn't get the words out. And she was like, I know. And so he kind of threw up his hands. We all went out, and he looked at me because I'd spent a lot of time in there. He's like, go back. She doesn't understand. And all I could think was, no, she understands. She understands just fine. But I said, sure. So I went back in and said, what he was trying to say is, if you don't do the dialysis, you will die. And she said, I know. And she said, I know, and I'm ready to go home. And I looked at her husband, and he said, yep, we need to go home today. I said, fine, let me write your papers up, let you go home. I'll just never forget her. I mean, there was just something about being with her and her husband that allowed a knowing of the world was different than all of these urgencies and stresses and this and that. That there was a way of being with life that was healing right even as someone's dying, was just totally healing. I wanted that, but I couldn't figure out, so how do you get from messy me, who does try to be at least kind, like I am at least trying to offer kindness, but like really messy me, how do you get from messy me to like living the spiritual life that I think, none of us would come to church for if we didn't have some sense that there was some meaning, something that means more than that story of success and do it all right and get into the right college and do all of those things. Like there's some essence that's totally different from that. That's what brings us alive and what allows us to know healing in the midst of whatever is happening in life. So, back to being burnt out, unhappy family practice doctor, not knowing what to do, I finally found my first mindfulness teacher, my first true mindfulness teacher. She came to me when she was 11 pounds. She was very small. Didn't know I was going to do this. She was 11 pounds, 7 months old, my first daughter. I adopted her from Russia, and some of you know her. She's now 28 and like totally on fire with the world. But when I brought her home, what she forced me to see was, oh, it's not just that I don't know how to help them handle their stress. She forced me to see, oh, I don't know how to handle my stress. And my stress is impacting the dearest I love, the one I love most. And that was my wake-up call. Like, oh, it's not how do I do my work out there in the world. It's how do I meet myself in a way that I have something different that comes forward in my life. So she's just nothing like having a teacher that will bite you if you don't figure it out. Like I say, she is my fire child. So, like holding her in front of me, I was like, I have to get out of medicine. I have to do something different, and then finally I had my excuse that I could do it like in a way that I felt like society would understand, maybe not. My mother certainly had a hard time with that one. But I really went on a journey. How do I put the oxygen mask on myself first so I'm available to show up? And that took me back to the books I had read on mindfulness in the past. It took me back to revisiting what is this thing called meditation? And now I was reading it through this entirely different lens, not an intellectual lens of, oh yeah, I like that stuff and I kind of already get it and I kind of already understand it, to, oh no, I have no clue what they're really saying and I really need to understand and not just think about it. I got to figure out how to practice it. And 5 years later, when she was 5, we went up to Worcester, Massachusetts, and I did my first training to become a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher at UMass Medical Center. This was the first model of secular mindfulness that was really being taught in the States. I did that. I went up there for 2 months for that first training, with the idea of bringing it back home and incorporating it into my medical practice. And I came back and I never practiced medicine again because I had found what I went to medical school for. This was the medicine I was really meant to do instead. So that's the gist of what brought me to mindfulness. And I kind of want to tell you about So why? Why this time did it make such a difference? And I want to keep my clock here so I know where I am time-wise. Good. The first was, I read a metaphor, and I'd actually read this book before, but I didn't really understand it. There's this beautiful metaphor of sailing a boat. The person who really knows how to sail a boat can sail out in the ocean in whatever conditions are going, and I shouldn't say whatever conditions, can sail skillfully, navigate well in a vast array of conditions, and have the sense, I turned it on instead of off, sorry, and have a sense of, when the waves were too big and you needed to go to safe harbor. And that's what the metaphor was for mindfulness, that it gives us, we can't change the conditions of life. There are times when the seas that we're in are very peaceful, and there are times when they are not, as we all know. If you are born, you are also working with dying. All of this is part of life. And so how do we find the way that we're skillful enough to navigate all sorts of seas? That was the piece I suddenly understood. I was not that level of skillful in managing the stress of my life. That, and then the second piece was just some plain old, I shouldn't say plain old because it was actually very new in my early days, neuroscience of understanding how the brain works. So I just want to add, I had this conversation, this one little piece in here, this conversation with someone recently who we were talking about mindfulness and spirituality and Christianity, and she was like, mindfulness is throughout the Bible. It's like everywhere in there. And I totally agree. There are ways in which a pointing to a particular quality of mind and heart that's the root of spiritual life is just named again and again and again and again. What's not named so clearly for me is, okay, how do I do that? How do I get from point A to point B in terms of doing that? There's this one, I'm going to give you Brain Science 101. There's this one new way of a very basic way of understanding what's happening in our brains that finally helped me understand why it's so darn hard to have values that we care about immensely and struggle to how to implement them, how to live them at that fullest level that we may want. So what I want to do is I want to give you this Brain Science 101, and then I want us to do a bit of a mindfulness meditation. So hopefully you can get some taste of how in this practice, and it is a lifelong practice, how in this practice we can start to take these kinds of insights, like this one brain science piece, and start to apply them in a way that, for me, flips the entire narrative. It used to be, why can't I get over my stress so I can live the spiritual life I'm meant to lead? Like I can do that. Instead, the flipped narrative is, oh, it's right in meeting my stress with what the values I care about most. That is what opens me up to living the life I'm really hungry to live. The stress is not what's in the way. The stress actually is what teaches us about how to authentically, deeply meet what's hard in life with our strongest heart and our wisest mind, and points us in that direction. So, Brain Science 101. This comes from, this part of it comes from a neuropsychiatrist, I think is what his title is, at Stanford. I think that's where he is. Daniel Siegel. He's very well known in the whole neuroscience, mindfulness, interlaid world. And he came up with this brilliant hand model for the brain. So he says, this is your brain. The arm, that's your spinal cord. The palm of the hand, this is the brain stem, the part of the brain that keeps the body alive. Right now, our brain stems are managing our blood flow, our hormonal levels, all of that stuff that we don't have any conception of. And when I teach kids, I talk about that being down in the basement with the lights off. And then your thumb represents the middle part of the brain. So this is the oldest part, this is the next oldest, the middle part. This is often called the emotional brain, or the limbic system. This also is below conscious control. And really important to know, down in this part of the brain, that's where our emotions come from. Our emotions don't originate in under conscious control. They come from the unconscious part of the brain. And also linked to this part of the brain is this really key part of the brain called the amygdala. And we actually have two of them, little almond shapes right in the middle of the brain, one on each side. And that's our survival system. So right now, all of us have amygdala in our brains that are scanning the room and always asking the question, is my organism safe? Is it not safe? The lighting in the room, is that okay? Is it not okay? You know, checking, is there sound out in the hall? Is that a safe sound and not safe? It's just always scanning the environment. Am I okay? Am I not okay? Down below conscious control. I'm functioning all the time. The fingers represent the part that we think of as our humanness. This is where our social, emotional intelligence comes from. This is the part that gets us through math tests and English studies and, you know, all of our analytical, rational. This is the conscious control part of the brain. This is what we need to interact with each other on a day-to-day level well. So when the brain, when the amygdala senses something stressful, it takes over. And so that's what I want to talk about in just a minute, or that's what I want us to look at for a moment. So the amygdala. Say for example, you were in the jungle and you were on some bird watching trip and you'd just eaten a nice lunch and you were about to pick up the binoculars and look for the bird. And then you hear a tiger. Not a Disney World tiger, but like the real thing, you know, and you can tell it smells you and is coming, and you have like a split second that you could save your life because the SUV is 10 feet away and the door is open. So there is a split second that you can get into that SUV and save your life. That moment that the amygdala registers the tiger, and it sends this cascade of stress hormones through the body. What happens? What do you notice? What do you feel in your body that moment you just suddenly recognize tiger? What happens before you start to run? Anyone? Say it again? Yeah, your heart rate goes boom, goes way up. Why? Why does your heart start going boom, 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 boom? What's it doing that for? The adrenaline is pumping it, but why? Why is it relevant that it's activate your muscles? Yeah, it is going to fight flight. I had one guy did this in one class, and he said, "Getting me ready to fight that tiger." And I thought, oh, I'm just so glad you're in this class. Let's learn something different than that one. So to activate your muscles, it's pumping as fast as it can, because that oxygen you're now sucking in is pumping that blood out to the large muscles of the body, so that when you do run, they are like, they're fired up and ready to go. What happens to the muscles in your arms and legs before you run? What's the very first thing that happens?
They tense?
They tense, yeah. Think about Olympic sprinters. When they're at that start line, the second before the race starts, they're not like lolly-dollying up there. They're like they're wound up and like tensed up, so that when this race starts, they go boom, they spring out. So that tension, that first tension, that gets the muscles ready to go. You just ate your lunch, so moments ago you're having this very pleasant digestion. What happens to your digestive system the moment you hear the tiger? It shuts down. Why?
That's less important than other things.
Oh my gosh, who cares whether you've digested that sandwich nicely if you're in the belly of a tiger? It's just not very relevant. Yeah, so it shuts down. There's like literally a whoosh of blood flow out of this part of the body where it was collected, going to other places. Can anyone relate to the belly being impacted by stress? You know, like, yeah. So that goes, the eyes. What happens to the pupils? They dilate. Why? So I can see more. So in that moment I can see more. Am I likely to go, oh, there's that yellow sapsuckered bellied thing. Am I going to see that in that moment?
You might.
Probably not. Probably not. What am I more likely to see? The SUV is this way. What am I more likely to see? Yeah, it goes into tunnel vision. You get like hyper focused on the only thing in that moment that matters, which you think is going to solve the problem to get into that SUV. And actually the optic nerve processes that faster than the conscious mind. So the vision is taking in every rock, every branch, every stick, every stone, everything between you and that door. So that when you do have that moment of whoosh and you run, you go as fast as possible and boom, you make it to the car while dodging all of those things, assuming that the system worked well and you were in condition enough for it, you know, like all of those. But that's like this elegant system designed to save your life. In the brain, any ideas? Here we talked about these three parts: brainstem, survival center, and your rational, analytical, social, emotional intelligence. Which part of the brain do you think is just highly irrelevant in that moment? Yeah. Well, no, the emotions they're down, they're clearing the deck. They're there, but like, does it matter that I learned in 8th grade that, oh no, wait a minute, I'm in the Amazon and there are no tigers in the Amazon. How could that be a tiger? Is that fact going to keep me alive? No.
Picture of a tiger.
At the moment I'm going to be eaten, I'm not thinking about a picture of a tiger. I hope. If I am thinking about it, I might be more likely to be tiger food. So the brain also does this really elegant survival thing. It quote unquote flips the lid. And literally up to 80% of the blood flow from our social emotional intelligence, from our rational, analytical, logical parts of our brain goes offline. And the amygdala is called amygdala hijacking. How's that? The amygdala takes over and narrows down the choice to 3 possibilities. The 3 are fight. Fight, flight, freeze. Things can function so much faster if that's the only choice on the table. Yes?
What is the difference in all of that happening in 12-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-year-old?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Or 25, versus a 1-month-old baby?
Oh, gosh. This whole part of the brain is not very developed in a 1-month-old baby. It's not even much online. They are pretty much already functioning from down here at some level or another. That's a little further than I can go for tonight, but interesting question, and I'm curious what you're thinking, so maybe afterwards I'd love to hear. Where I thought you were going to go is what's the difference between all of that and me and day-to-day stress? So think about your day-to-day stress. Ever notice your muscles tighten up? The heart starts beating kind of fast. The belly doesn't feel good. You can't see, like the tunnel vision is the only thing you can think about is problem, and it's harder to think rationally and socially, emotionally, intelligently about it. So this very elegant system designed to save our life in our modern world has gotten hijacked by our culture. And most of us are going around all the time with some kind of flipped lid or another. That is that piece of, okay, here's how I want to be. Here's how I am. Oh, of course it's hard to be here when I'm walking around with a flipped lid all the time, when I'm walking around in some degree of I am just too stressed out to really even be able to think straight. The lovely thing about mindfulness is what it teaches us is to, instead of judging ourselves for being flipped out, it teaches us, number 1, to recognize it. My lid is flipped. And be able to get in this moment, I am disconnected from my social emotional intelligence, so I'm not going to talk to my 16-year-old and engage in, I mean, this is like fundamentally practical stuff. If my lid is flipped and I'm not doing well in that moment, that's not my time to try to go out and have that intense conversation. That's my time to say, oh, like I'm like bringing massive self-compassion. I'm really not doing well. And I'm bringing compassion to my relationship with the person I care about, saying, oh, I really care about doing this conversation well, but I gotta go get my lid back on first. And then I learn how to meet me as a normal human being with a flipped lid that just needs some care to help my lid come back on. And then from here, then I have a whole different possibility of meeting what I care about the most and meeting it well. But if I don't know how to recognize my lid's flipped, I'm going around my life trying to deal with this stuff from this place. And that just is really very hard to do. So all of that was for me just so useful as to why I need this practice. If I just, like, if we all just do it together right now, take a breath, just breathe in and breathe out. Just that takes us out of the sympathetic nervous system. A deep breath takes us out of the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight, flight, freeze, and brings us into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our nervous system of well-being, of when I am okay and I am grounded. And there are all of these practices and skills that we can actually learn that are infinitely compassionate and very, very wise to bring ourselves back in line in order to do better with what we want in our life. So that's kind of my mindfulness in a nutshell, little bit there, in terms of how I kind of feel like it's fundamental to my spiritual life, to helping me bring forward more of who I really want to be in the world, and how I really care about being in the world. We have about 10 minutes left. What I thought I would do is just a short practice, if that's okay, and then just a little bit of time for a couple of questions, if that sounds good. Okay? Good. So I invite you to find whatever posture best supports your body. Maybe take a couple of nice deep in and out breaths. Breathe in, breathe out. And then take a moment to check in. What's going on in your body, heart, and mind? Maybe starting with the thinking mind. Like, notice what kind of thoughts are moving through the mind. It doesn't matter so much what they are, it's more, can you notice them? Oh, I'm thinking this. That's in this direction. What kind of emotions might be in the body? The lovely thing about mindfulness is we're never supposed to have a certain kind of experience to be good. The question is, can we notice what kind of experience we are having? So there's all the permission in the world to notice whatever your emotional world is like right now. Whether it be boredom, frustration, impatience, interest, curiosity, peacefulness. And this practice always has room for us to meet ourselves as we really are, as opposed to feeling like we need to change ourselves into how we should be. There's this deep, deep acknowledging, validating. Oh, of course, in this moment right now, I'm having these kind of thoughts and these kind of emotions. And it feels in my body like this. And when you can get some sense of it, then you know what needs to be met in your own system. And there's a way of simply offering a breath to your own system. You can take a nice deep breath in again. Breathe in and breathe out, ventilating through everything that you're feeling. Mindfulness invites us to understand how to tap into the strength of the heart. Sometimes we confuse the heart qualities for kind of the sappy sentimentality. But actually that's where the word courage comes from, la cour in French, heart. That is our courage. Learning to meet our own selves through the courage of our hearts, that's a piece of work. So sometimes it helps to bring forward an image of someone that is easy for you, to bring kindness, bring compassion for. So if you bring someone to mind that just brings a smile to your face, a smile to you, could even be an animal, a pet. And think about if that person, if that animal were having a hard moment, then there's some sort of access that you can understand of care. So mindfulness practice is often called a befriending practice. We learn how to be that kind of best friend with ourselves. So in whatever way you do know how to offer care, all of us do, you learn to tap into where we know something about offering care and explore with curiosity, how do we bring it to ourselves? Neurologically, we know that is one of the strongest ways to bring a flipped lid back into a whole brain. And of course, it's not easy at first, so it's just fine, whatever kind of experience you're having. Just notice that. If what you're noticing is this feels really hard, or I don't know how to relate to it, you just acknowledge that. Hard, difficult to relate to. Good enough. I'm going to read a poem by Dana Falls called The Mud of the Moment. Truth lives in the mud of this moment. It exists in the messy interplay of emotions and relationship. In the personality traits I'd rather leave behind. To experience truth doesn't take sainthood or dissolving my desires. It requires diving into the muck and mire of what's here, feeling the anxiety or fear, knowing the entirety of me without hiding from the shadows or from light. Choosing to be whole, awareness makes the leap to see that I am truth, always was, always will be. The radiant singularity, the infinite in human form. The lotus never blooms without sinking roots in mud. Thank you. So we literally have a couple of minutes. If someone has a question or two, we can just see maybe a question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I blow my lid plenty.
Me too.
My question is, when you notice someone you love has blown their top, please advise.
Yeah. First thing I wouldn't do is go, oh, have you flipped your lid? Yeah, I wouldn't do that. That's a really hard one. Yeah, and it helps. People get this hand model. When my girls were little, all of us knew it, and everyone had a right to say, my lid's flipped, and opt out. You know, it wasn't like you have to stay for this conversation. When my daughters were teenagers, and you know, one of them was like Mom, I'm here. It was not, oh, stay with me. It's like, oh dear, thank you for telling me. Let me let you go. So one, it does help to have a shared vocabulary and willingness to give room for the reality of we're all messy human beings. We all flip our lids. If the other person's not recognizing it, then it just depends on, so do you just validate and listen? Like, oh, I just get it. Yeah, what you're naming is really, really hard. That brings safety to when somebody really feels that you're hearing them and understanding them and getting them. That in and of itself is a great way to help a lid come back. It might be that you say something like, wow, I get that this really matters to you and I really want to talk about it, but I don't feel like at the moment I can do it very well. So can we just take 5 minutes? And again, it helps if you had this kind of conversation before. But there are a lot of ways, and there's no one easy answer to that, but there are a lot of skillful ways we can learn how to help those situations. And sometimes it is their lid's flipped and they're just going to be flipped out and it's not mine to fix. What mine is to make sure I stay in loving relationship as much as I can with someone I care about and me. So, thank you. Great question. Okay, so Charlotte Center for Mindfulness, if any of you want classes in this, there are 1,000 ways to learn the little tidbits, but if you really want to know how to navigate that kind of situation that he's talking about, it's not a 5-minute lesson. It's not even a 1-hour lesson. We have 8-week classes where people come for 2.5 hours once a week for 8 weeks and have a Saturday retreat day. And by the end of that, and this is, like I say, researchable, people do better. People have a much greater sense of how to navigate all of this in their lives. So please look us up if we can be of service. And in the meantime, I really appreciate being here with you all tonight and appreciate your willingness to share and listen and wonder about, how do we meet our spiritual lives in a way that we're bringing more of our whole self forward in a world that needs us to do this. So, thank you.
Thank you.